If you want to get your freezer stacked, whether you're just doubling your dinners or making a week or a month's worth of meals at one time, the first step towards that is the planning. There are two ways you can do this. You can either choose your recipes, calculate how much of each ingredient you're going to need, and use that information to create yourself a shopping list and a prep list for not only what you need to prep, but how you need to prep it, like whether your onions need to be diced or sliced or minced. And then you can go and get your groceries and get started on your prep. Or you can just hit the easy button and use the Freezer Meals 101 Club. Use the filter to easily choose the recipes you want in your custom meal plan. Create your shopping list, prep list, where it does all the calculations for you, and you can even change the serving size so that it changes as it goes. And then you can print off your shopping list and your prep list, and you can either put in an online grocery order or go pick up your groceries yourself, and then you are ready to prep. In today's video, I am going to walk you through exactly how I do my prep once I have the groceries, and I'm going to share all kinds of really awesome tips with you to make your prep easier so that you set yourself up for the ultimate success when you go to assemble your freezer meals. Let's get started. If you're trying to choose your recipes and you're not sure what freezes and what doesn't, you can go ahead and grab our What Freezes Well cheat sheet. This will tell you not only what freezes and what doesn't, but also give you tips on how to freeze things so that they'll taste as good and fresh as possible. You can find a link to this in the description down below. The first thing that we're going to be prepping today is some chicken. Some of our recipes are going to be using raw chicken, and we don't need to worry about that at all yet. But today we do need to cook and cube some chicken so that we can use it in the meals that call for that. I'm using frozen chicken for this today, but you can absolutely use fresh. The only difference is that you do change the cooking time if you're using fresh versus frozen. The reason I'm using frozen is simply because I was able to get this on an incredible sale, and it was the least expensive way to buy it. Personally, I don't usually use frozen chicken when I am doing recipes that call for raw chicken, because then the bags are able to sit flat in the freezer. So we're just gonna put our chicken breasts, whether they are frozen or fresh, right down on our baking sheet. I did line mine with parchment paper, but that is not a required step. And then we're going to bake this in the oven at 375 degrees. Now again, the baking time changes depending on if you're using frozen or raw, and it depends on the size of your chicken breast. So the best way to tell when it's done is to use a meat thermometer. And when you're using a meat thermometer, you actually want to check each breast because they are different sizes and they're going to cook differently. Once it reaches 165 degrees Fahrenheit, then they are safe. So if you find that you've got some that are not yet cooked and others that have already reached that temperature, you can go ahead and pull them right off of your baking sheet, put them on a plate, and then put the other ones back in for them to finish cooking. The other way that I sometimes prep my chicken, if I need cooked cube chicken, is in the Instant Pot. If you're going to use the Instant Pot for that, then if you were using fresh chicken, it's 8 minutes for chicken breasts. You do want to add a little tiny bit of water in there, and then you just do a manual release after your 8 minutes, and they are fully cooked. The reason that today I'm using baking sheets is that I have so much chicken to get ready, and I just find that this way is faster because I can't fit it all into the Instant Pot. But if I was just doing one recipe, or even if I was doing one recipe and doubling it, then I would go ahead and just use my Instant Pot and do this really quickly. Once that chicken is fully cooked, we're gonna wait a little bit until it's cool enough that we can handle it without burning our fingers, and then we're gonna cube it up to get it all ready and put it into a container where we can store it in the fridge overnight. We recommend that you do your prep the day before assembling your freezer meals for two reasons. One is it breaks things up to make it more manageable and less overwhelming. And two is that when you're freezer cooking, you do want your ingredients to go into the bags when they're fully cool. And if you prep the day before, then it allows those ingredients to stay in your fridge where they can be cool when you're adding them into your freezer bags the next day. The reason you want the ingredients to be cool is because you don't want condensation to happen inside your bags. That can change the texture of your freezer meals. And sometimes if you've heard people complain about the texture of freezer meals, that might be one of the things they were doing wrong. So this will avoid that for you. And then also, it means that your freezer doesn't have to work as hard because it's not having to freeze things that are hot or warm. And you're not taking something that's hot and putting it in the freezer on top of something that's frozen, which can potentially thaw that enough where it becomes an unsafe food situation. So there's so many reasons why this is the best method, but my favorite one is just because it makes this less daunting. You can even put on an audiobook or a TV show while you're cubing your chicken or while you're dicing your onions or whatever, and this can be a pretty relaxed experience. And then when you go to assemble the meals, you can be fully focused and everything is ready, and things just go so smoothly because you're just ready to throw things in the bags and get them in your freezer. The next thing that we're gonna prep today is our ground beef. For these recipes that I'm getting ready for, there's actually a lot of ground beef, but some of it is going to stay raw. That's going to go into meatloaf, so that can just sit in the fridge overnight tonight. But the ones that need to be cooked, I do like to again use baking sheets. In the past, I have also used the roasting oven or the slow cooker when doing ground beef. I have settled on the baking sheets being my preferred method. It's really similar to doing it in a skillet, and you can totally do it in a skillet, which is what I would recommend if you're just making ground beef for one recipe, just like a pound or 2 or 3 of ground beef. I'd go ahead and do it on the skillet. But today we're doing so many pounds of ground beef, it's just gonna be a lot faster to get that laid out on a baking sheet and get that done. I lined my baking sheet with 2 layers of aluminum foil and then spread the ground beef on there using my mix and chop. You can fit about 5 pounds of ground beef on one baking sheet, so you can see how you can get a lot more done than doing batches and batches in the skillet. The other thing that I like about doing my meat in the oven is then it allows me some time to start working on my vegetables while the meat cooks. Whereas I find that if I'm doing it in the skillet, then I mostly have to stand there and babysit it. So this is a great out of sight, out of mind way. However, I do check on mine once or twice when it's in the oven, and when I do that, I pull it out, I use the mix and chop to mix it around, and then I drain the fat and put it back in the oven to continue cooking. Now, for my ground sausage, it could go in the oven just as easily as the ground beef can, and you would cook it in a similar fashion. However, when I'm doing my prep, the honest truth is that at this point, I've run out of oven space. And this happens to me every time that I'm gonna do a large amount of freezer meals at a time. So what I do with my ground sausage is I actually cook mine in my slow cooker. I just throw it all in there. I can fit a lot of packages in the slow cooker at one time, and I take a mix and chop and continue to break it up as it cooks. And when it is fully cooked, I can transfer it into a container so that it's ready the next day to use in our freezer meals. Now that we have the ground beef in the oven, and I also have the chicken in the oven because I'm very fortunate that I have a double oven. So I've got one on top and one on the bottom, so I can have 2 things going in there at one time. And then we also have our ground sausage going in the slow cooker. So we've got like a whole meat thing happening in this kitchen right now. And I am gonna go and slice my kielbasa, Ukrainian sausage, garlic sausage, no matter what you call it, it's the same thing. So I'm going to get this sliced and just ready. Now I wanted to give you a little tip on this one. This one is going in our Cajun sausage and vegetable sheet pan meal. And I'm doubling it, so I'm making 2. Instead of slicing these and putting them into a container in the fridge and then portioning them out between 2 bags tomorrow, I'm just gonna prep them and put them immediately into the freezer bag. That's gonna save me a step tomorrow, and it's gonna save me figuring out what exactly is half of the amount that I've cut. So just a tiny little tip there. The reason that those things matter is when you're making a lot of meals at one time, it's the little things that add up and become really big things. So another one of those little things pertains to that ground sausage or ground beef, and that is that we like to keep a scoop in those for the day that we're assembling, because then you can easily portion it into your bags, and we just keep the scoop in there the whole time that we're making the meals. And the reason that that is so easy is that 2 1/3 cups equals 1 pound of ground meat. So whether it's ground chicken, ground sausage, ground beef, it's gonna be in around that 2 1/3 cup range. So if you're working with a recipe and it calls for 1 pound of ground beef, you're just gonna easily scoop your 2 1/3 cups into your bag, and then you know you're set and you can move on to the next recipe. The other thing that we like to do, again, really tiny little time saver, but it adds up, is we keep a scoop in our diced onions, in our minced onions. We keep a spoon in the jar of minced garlic. Even just having the jar of minced garlic is another way that we save ourselves time, because we're not fussing with mincing our own garlic. If you want to mince garlic yourself, have at her. There is no wrong way when it comes to getting your freezer meals done, and if you'd prefer that, that is great, but this is something that we've found that works for us, and we're willing to use the jarred garlic. You'll notice that some of our recipes call for sausage meatballs. None of the ones that I'm prepping for today do, but I want to show you what you would do if a recipe called for that and how you would prep those. So all you would do is take your Italian sausage and slice it down the casing to open it, and then you would take a knife, it doesn't even need to be a sharp one, and you would just slice them down to create portions that would be about the right size for your meatballs. And then you'll put those, lay them out on a baking sheet. Again, it's easier if you line it with parchment paper. And then you get those into the oven, and you've just made yourself some cute little sausage meatballs that'll be great in the recipes. One little trick for that is I do find they're a bit greasy, and so even after I've drained them, I do like to put some paper towel into the container that I'm putting them in overnight, so some of the rest of the grease can be absorbed and they're less fatty when I'm adding them into the meals. When it comes to shredding cheese, I do have a trick for you. If you're doing large quantities of cheese, and sometimes we've had as much as 40 or more cups of shredded cheddar cheese when we've done our mega sessions where we do 3 months worth of meals. If you're just shredding a small amount of cheese, it's fine, and you can just use your regular cheese grater. When we do those large quantities, Christy usually does them, and she does them actually with her food processor. So I'll pop a video right there so that you can see how Christy does that. But for today, I'm just needing to prep a very small amount of cheese. So I'm just using a good old cheese grater. But I'm going to show you this thing that you're going to need to know. So just grate the cheese regularly as you would using your preferred method. Big chunks of cheese like this, you can throw them in the freezer, but you won't be able to use them after that for sliced cheese and things like that. But you will be able to use them, like if you got an amazing sale on cheese, then you could do that and you could later grate them up, but it is going to change the texture and they're going to be more crumbly and a little bit harder to grate actually. So one thing that you can do if you find cheese on sale and you're going to be using it once it's shredded, then what you can do is shred it ahead and get it in your freezer just like that, and then it freezes well and it works as shredded cheese without any texture issues. For today, this is going to be used in the freezer meals that I'm making tomorrow, and what I don't want is for it to stick together, because I don't know if you've ever grated cheese ahead before, but what you might have found is that you can end up with one big blob, and it's not that easy to work with. So what we're going to do is, as we add it to our bowl, we're just gonna add in a little bit of cornstarch. If you have a corn allergy, you can use potato starch for this. So the amount you use depends on how much cheese you're grating. But when we get that in there and just give it a shake, that will mean that our cheese doesn't stick together. So as I grate this cheese and add it to the bowl, it'll be right ready to use tomorrow. Here and there, depending on how much I add, I might need to add a little bit more cornstarch, and I will need to continue to give it a shake here and there. But this is our little cheese hack that will hopefully help you when you prep your grated cheese. One more thing that I want to tell you about grated cheese is to check your prices, because it is often much less expensive, of course, to buy a large block of cheese. Now today, because I'm just, like I said, we only need a few cups for the meals I'm making tomorrow. So I just bought a regular block of cheese, or I mean, for our family, this is a regular block. This might be a large block to you if you have a smaller family or if you're on your own, but you can buy like giant thick like bricks of cheese if you go to Costco or even sometimes at your local grocery store, and it's much less expensive to buy it that way most of the time, but not all the time. So we always do some math and figure out if it's less expensive to buy the pre-grated cheese or to buy it and shred it ourselves. If it is less expensive to buy the grated cheese, then we obviously go ahead and do that so that we save ourselves a step on prep. And this time, I actually was able to get a sale on the Tex-Mex cheese, and Tex-Mex cheese was on my prep list. So I did go ahead and buy that. Sometimes at Costco, the grated mozzarella cheese is less expensive than buying it in the blocks, like strange but true. So check that out to maybe save yourself a step. But if you do need to go ahead and grate the cheese, then just use a little bit of cornstarch or potato starch to ensure that it doesn't stick together. Now that our meat is cooking and doing its thing, we're gonna move on to some vegetables. So the first thing I'm gonna show you is definitely the most fun, in my opinion, and that is the onions, because when you're doing a lot of meals at one time, onions used to be one of those things that was challenging. You know, you get the tears, and I know everybody has the suggestions for how you can make yourself not cry as much, but even with that, if you need to chop like 40 onions at once because you're making 3 months of meals, it's a lot of onions. So once we discovered this vegetable chopper, like, oh, it was a game changer. So you can absolutely chop your onions by hand, and if you're just making a few recipes or just doubling your dinners or whatever, then absolutely go ahead and just chop the onions. But if you're gonna be making huge quantities of meals, you might wanna take some of the money that you're saving by not going through the drive-thru anymore, not getting takeout, not buying convenience foods or impulse buys, and being able to shop in bulk. And you can take some of that savings and buy yourself a vegetable chopper. We mostly just use ours for onions, but even that makes it worth it. I never say that you need a lot of gadgets or gizmos or whatever when you're doing freezer cooking. What you really need is the Freezer Meals 101 Club and a good kitchen knife and some containers and your food, and that's it, really. Well, maybe you need some measuring cups and measuring spoons and your typical kitchen things, but if you want the wish list for what makes it easier, then the onion chopper should be at the top of that list. And the thing that should be right underneath it is the electric can opener. I feel like I got this one here and this one here. And this is like the freezer meal dream team right here. I think one time when we were doing a YouTube video, Christy announced that we had sort of like an MVP of the game, which was the electric can opener, and then she gave like second prize to the onion chopper, and she made this little podium graphic. It was really quite funny. Anyway, so we're gonna chop our onion, and for these particular meals that I'm making, I need 4 diced onions and for minced onions. I think I also need some sliced onions. So we're gonna get that all prepped. The nice thing is it's all written on my prep list, so I don't really have to think too much about it or go into each individual recipe and calculate it out. So when you're gonna use the onion chopper, what you'll do is cut the ends off the onion and then cut it in half. And it's at that point that I like to peel it because it's easier to peel once it's been cut in half. And this reminds me that I do need to grab one more thing that I think makes this easier. I like to just have a bowl that I keep on the counter when I'm doing prep so that I put my vegetable food scraps in it, and then that can go to compost. But the nice thing about that too is that it gets things out of the way and you're not having to run back and forth to your compost or garbage. Like I was saying, every little thing that saves time adds up. Now you're just gonna cut the onion into some giant chunks and then put it onto your food chopper. And this is the fun part. Just like that, I have diced onion. So easy and super fun. If you've got frustrations in your life and you don't have a healthy outlet, I'm telling you. Now, we like to put ours down so that we kind of wedge it. We find that then the pieces are more even if we do it this way, but really any way you do it, it's still gonna work. I also find if I have my bowls out ready to take my prepped ingredients, that can be helpful. Now, what if you don't have fridge space to keep these overnight? That is a legitimate question. Because I have such a large family, I have an extra fridge. So that's not something that I run into too often. However, I have run into it before because we were having some kind of big event. I don't know if it was an anniversary party or Christmas or whatever it was. My fridge was really full of things that I was using for the event. And so when I was prepping for my freezer meal session, I did completely run out of space. So in that case, what I did is I used a cooler and kept some ice packs in there, and overnight it was just fine. Now the other thing that you can do if you don't have a lot of bowls, because I have a lot of bowls. I've been doing freezer cooking for a lot of years. Plus, like I said already, I have a large family. So I just have collected over the years a lot of bowls, and some of them, like these ones that I've got, they're graduated, so they have the amounts on here so I can see how many cups of whatever prepped ingredient is there. And you know, it's just handy. Again, it's a nice to have, not a need to have. But this one has a lid. These ones, same thing. They have the measurements on them and they have lids, but you don't need these things at all. When I first started, I used, of course, bowls that we just had around the house, but I also used things like empty ice cream buckets. And sometimes I just used freezer bags to have my prepped ingredients in, and then I reused them with some of the meals that called for those same ingredients. And the other thing about using freezer bags is it takes up less space in the fridge. So you might need to get a little bit creative depending on how much storage you have in your fridge and also what kind of containers you have. But you've got this. Like, it does not have to be perfect, and it does not, like, you can use an old cleaned out sour cream container to keep your onions in overnight. Like, it does not have to be some fancy graduated bowl. So no matter what your circumstances are, you can do this. So then we're gonna move on to our minced onions, and that is gonna be exactly the same, except that we're gonna change out the blade in here, and we're just gonna use a smaller blade. And as simple as that, I can have minced onions. Our red pepper and our green pepper today just need to be diced. So we're gonna go ahead and do that with just a regular kitchen knife. However, you could, if you wanted to, go ahead and use the vegetable chopper for that. Again, I'm gonna use my compost bowl and get the seeds and membrane out. Now, when it comes to bell peppers, one thing that we learned the hard way a number of years ago is that you want to prep them the day before, but you don't want to prep them several days before because they really won't keep in your fridge for that long once they're sliced or diced or cut into large chunks. So you do want to get them into meals and in the freezer. And that brings me to another great point about freezer meals, which is, have you ever had the experience of you go to the store and you have this list, maybe you even have a meal plan of what you're gonna make that week. And you're like, oh, on Wednesday, I'm gonna have chicken and couscous and a Greek salad. So I'm gonna buy a cucumber and the baby tomatoes and the purple onion, and it's gonna be beautiful. I'm even gonna buy some feta and sliced black olives for that meal. And then life happens. And before you know it, it's 2 weeks later and you open your crisper and that cucumber is a puddle of mush in the plastic, and you're like having to wash out your crisper because you've got moldy vegetables in there, and you've got this beautiful green pepper that you were gonna put in that Greek salad and your tomatoes and all the things, and now they've had to go to waste. The great thing about buying vegetables for your freezer meals is that you buy them. I bought mine just this morning, and then you get them prepped. The next day you get them into meals. Like, these are actually gonna go into the full meal so that you're gonna be able to eat this. You're gonna know once it's in your freezer, nothing's going to waste. These are actually gonna get eaten, and the plan, your idea of on this day I'm gonna make this and this and this, the plan actually takes shape and actually happens. And it doesn't matter if life happens. It doesn't matter if something happens that derails your plan, because then you just move that meal to a different day. Nothing's going bad in your crispers. You don't have chicken going bad in your fridge and then you're feeling guilty when you have to throw it away. Nothing like that is happening because these vegetables are actually going into a meal. I'm gonna finish this pepper off later, and then we're gonna dice our green pepper. I'm assuming that you'll know that it's the same as when I dice the red pepper, it's just green. And then we're gonna do some zucchini. Now, sometimes we call for diced zucchini, sometimes sliced. In these particular recipes that I'm making, they are just large chunks. So I'm just gonna get these cut into large chunks. I'm not the best with spatial concepts, so I have to say the bowls I choose don't always work out to be the right size. This one might be way too big, but I was thinking that these would be too small. So we'll see how I did on my estimation here. As you can see, I'm using the same knife for all of these vegetables, which is perfectly safe to do as long as you don't have allergies in your house. If you have allergies, then of course you're going to have to wash the knife and cutting board in between. But as long as it's all vegetables, you can keep using the same knife, the same cutting board, and you can see that normally, if you're making meals fresh every single day, then you are dirtying a knife and a cutting board every day, and you're getting one meal made. Well, today I'm getting this prepped so that I can make 10 different recipes, but I am doubling each of the recipes, which would be 20 meals, except that 5 of the recipes are gonna be for 1 or 2. So those ones, instead of making 1 meal each, are gonna be making 4 or 8 or 10 or 12, depending. So I'm actually going to end up with so many meals, and I only have to wash my cutting board and my knife 1 time. I also only have to stand in my kitchen and do this 1 time, which is another one of the beauties of cooking this way. I'm just curious how bad my spatial skills really are. I'm gonna see if I can fit them in here. Okay, so I wasn't completely wrong. I wouldn't be able to put a lid on here, but this bowl was too big. So there's some happy medium. Maybe this bowl would have been the right happy medium, but it's being used as our compost. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Done is better than perfect. Here we are. I have coarsely cubed zucchini. Another thing I like to do that saves a little bit of time, just a tiny bit, but again, it all adds up, is I do all the vegetables that need any peeling, I do them at the same time. So This is our sweet potato or yam, our butternut squash, and we're also going to be doing some of our carrots. Now, hold on. For one of these recipes, it calls for shredded or matchstick carrots. So I often cheat if I can find these at my grocery store. They are already cut into matchsticks for me. It saves me doing some prep. It's a nice little cheat, but it does depend on the price of these. If they're a good price, then absolutely this is the way to go. If not, you just go ahead and shred your carrots or cut them into matchsticks yourself. But we do have one recipe that calls for just some peeled and diced carrots, and so we'll be doing those when we do our butternut squash and sweet potato. And you can already guess the reason, and that is that I do not love dishes. These are all going into very similar meals. They're vegetables. You don't have to worry about cross-contamination that way. And so you don't have to wash your peeler in between. And if you feel like you would feel better if you washed your peeler in between those vegetables, then you go ahead. I am totally in support of that decision, but if you want to throw caution to the wind and just peel multiple types of vegetable with one peeler without washing it, then join me on this rebellious journey and we will get these done. Again, I'm just putting the scraps into my compost bowl. Now, this compost bowl, let me talk to you about that. I do live in the country, so I do have a compost pile, and I often put my compost there. However, you know what else is really awesome with your compost bowl is that you can make homemade broth. So if you're making chicken broth, like if you're breaking down some rotisserie chicken or some chicken with bone in it, or you've got, your turkey carcass or something like that, then you can add these vegetable peelings into there and create a really flavorful broth. You just, get rid of the peelings at the end, but they add so much flavor. Or you can make a homemade vegetable broth. So nothing needs to go to waste. It's kind of one of our mottos around here. We do not like things to go to waste. I know that some of you have physical limitations, and that's one of the reasons that freezer meals work so well for you. But there are also some things that you can do to make this method work even better. One of those things is that when you're doing your prep and even when you're assembling your meals, it might be easier for you to do that sitting down. Now, one thing I recommend to absolutely everyone is when you do your prep and do your assembly, wear good shoes. Wear shoes in your house, wear runners, wear walking shoes, wear whatever shoes are going to be good for your back and good for your feet. It really does help because you're standing on your feet for quite a while. And if standing isn't an option, you can do a lot of this sitting down. So you can sit at the table. Maybe you can get help from family or friends. This really is something that's doable if you make adaptations. And that brings me to our lovely little sweet potato here. This sweet potato can be tough to cut. So if you've got physical limitations, this might be a challenge for you. I have a trick. If you have a microwave, throw this on a plate and microwave it. We're talking just like 30, 45 seconds. You can check it. You don't want to cook it, but if you just soften it the tiniest little bit, this is going to make it easier for you to cut. So that is one thing that I often like to do with my sweet potato, is like to just give it a quick microwave so that it's easier for my hands. Now for the butternut squash, you are going to need to peel that one with a knife rather than with a vegetable peeler. And we are going to unfortunately need to switch to a larger knife. So sadly, I'm going to have to wash 2 knives today. I know, cue the little violins. I'll be okay. I am not a professional chef. I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to cutting vegetables other than my nice little chopper that I'm pretty good at using. But one thing that I like to do with the butternut squash is cut it in half and then lay it so that it's got a flat side down, and then I just find it easier to peel that way. Again, I have no idea if this is the right way, but that's just something that I do. You do want to make sure that you wipe your counters down in between ingredients, particularly when you're dealing with meat. You don't want to risk any cross-contamination. I will be reminding you of this in the next video, but that is also the reason that when we are assembling our freezer meals, we do them one protein at a time. We often use raw ingredients in our freezer meals so they can cook up fresh on the day that we serve it. But particularly if you're doing freezer meals for 1 or 2, or if you're doing freezer meals so that you can take them with you in individual servings for lunch and warm them up at work, then you might want to pre-cook some of your ingredients. We do always like to pre-cook our ground beef unless it's going in something like meatloaf or meatballs, because we prefer the texture that way. But if we're doing individual meals, then we even sometimes pre-cook things like rice and pasta. There is a trick to that, and that is that you want to undercook them slightly, particularly with pasta. We suggest about 2 minutes under what the package instructions say. That way, when you're reheating it, it's not mushy and you do get the right texture. So that's our recommendation for that. Now for rice, again, you want to cool it before it goes into your freezer bags. So if you're making your rice the day before, like we are today, then it's not an issue. You can just have it cool in your fridge overnight. But if you're making your rice up that day, it has happened to me, I'm gonna be honest, it has happened to me on more than one occasion where I've forgotten to cook the rice in my prep, and so then I have to cook the rice on the day that we're assembling the meals. If you're in a pinch and you need to cool the rice quickly, then all you need to do is spread it out onto a baking sheet, because you're increasing the surface area, so it's gonna cool a lot faster. Now with rice, you do need to be careful. You don't want it to sit on your counter for too long. So once it's on that baking sheet, you do want to get it into your fridge or freezer to allow it to cool, and then only take it out when you're ready to assemble the meal that you're making with the rice. In this case, I am prepping it to make chicken fried rice, which is an amazing recipe. It's so delicious and it's so versatile. It's one that you can take to potlucks. You can do it for individual meals because it is just a quick reheat, but it's a great family meal too. It's just so good. So I'm getting the rice made right now so that we can have that ready for tomorrow when we go to assemble these meals. Another tip that I have for you when it comes to prep is that if you've gone out and you've gotten the ingredients for these freezer meals, when you get home with your groceries, don't put the groceries away. Obviously, put anything that needs to be refrigerated or frozen away, but other than that, instead of putting these things into your pantry or cupboard, if you have the counter space for it, then I suggest that you put them out on your counter or even on your table if you can spare your table for that night. Because what that's going to do is when you go to assemble your meals, you're not going to be running around trying to find all the ingredients. Now, there will be things that you didn't buy because you knew that you had them already in your pantry. That's a great thing about the customizable shopping list, is that you can go through it and uncheck the things that you already have so that when you print off the list, those things aren't there. But other than that, everything will be ready to go. It again just saves you little bits of time, and those little bits add up. I hope that you found this helpful and that you feel a little bit more prepared to go into making your first freezer stack, because once you get your freezer stacked, then you can relax. Thank you for joining me today, and happy cooking.